anybody for any state energy offices or HBCUs that are unable to make it today. We also have a quick poll question that we'd like to ask you. And it's just which organization you represent. So if you could quickly note where you're from, we'd greatly appreciate it. Great, we're getting some state energy offices, some MSIs, a few companies and federal agencies. Great. I'll give another few seconds for any last minute answers. Okay, wonderful. Well, it looks like we have a really good representation across the board of who's around the room and who's interested in this topic. So thanks for being here. Great. Well, I would next like to invite Vince Quarles, who's the Deputy Director of the Office of Minority Programs within DOE's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, to share a few remarks about his office. A lot of the research and the discussion that we'll be having today could not have happened without Vince's support and the support of his team members. So thank you again, Vince, for being here, and I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you so very much, Sandy and Natasha, for inviting me to be here today. Just want to make sure you can see my slides at this time. Great. I thought about what can you say in 5 to 7 minutes. I would like to focus in on one particular word on the slide, and that is partnership. Today, I want to take 5 to 7 minutes just to provide a quick update on the structure and the mission of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. Again, my name is Vince Quarles. I serve within, and I'll say ED for short, of the office as a Deputy Director for the Office of Minority Programs. And it's truly my pleasure to be here today just to provide a quick update. Currently, as you can see on the slide, the mission of our office, and that is to advise the Secretary for the Department of Energy on the effects of energy policies. And we really work with minority stakeholders to include minority businesses, as well as minority serving institutions. Currently, our acting director is Ms. Ann Augustin, who's been with the department for a number of years as our principal deputy. And we're very fortunate to have on board now Ms. Shalana Baker, who serves as the Secretary of Advisors on Equity and the Deputy for Energy Justice. And we have involved our office as we look at pursuing the Biden's administration in terms of executive orders, as well as our congressional mandates. I'm going to speak more about the current priorities. But before then, I know some of you have worked with our office in the past. At that time, it was 2 subordinate offices to include the office that I'm representing. That's the Office of Minority Programs. We also have, for a while, had the Office of Civil Rights and EEO. In addition to those 2 offices, and this is one update I wanted to make sure we share today, we've added, as you can see from my slide, the Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis, as well as the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And it's of potential interest that we restructure to be able to implement our congressional mandates, as well as fulfill some emerging executive orders, as you can see on my next slide. So behind all of the executive orders is, of course, the strategic mission of the department itself and our agency. And now I want to just dive a little bit more into some of the executive orders that we're pursuing with the new structure, as I just spoken to. Executive Order 13985. I know that's been talked about for quite a while. as you can read my slide, a directive for federal agencies on advancing racial equality and equity, excuse me. And as part of this executive order, each federal agencies that were named was to do two things: assess those barriers that prevent disadvantaged communities from participating, and that was due back in August. And our department has actually divided our assessment into work streams for 6 different work groups, as you can see on my slide. And we submitted our assessment on time. And now the next part is not just assess those barriers, but really speak to a strategic plan. How can we work together within the department to overcome the assessed barriers? And that strategic plan is actually due in January of the coming year. So it's a lot of effort right now, working across all of our program offices to be able to make sure that we have the ability to deliver on the requirements of the Executive Order 13985. Another order I really want to just highlight, and that is 14008, tackling the climate crisis here at home. And inside of that is to call out that 40%, and I know most of you have heard this before, of the investments for the things that's going to be talked about later today, go to disadvantaged communities. And so one thing I wanted to be able to call out in terms of a near-term, pretty recent effort is having a baseline. Where are current Department of Energy investments going? I would invite you to go to our office's website. And from there, you can select the Energy Justice Dashboard. And from there, you can get a feel for exactly how much the Department of Energy has invested in minority serving institutions, minority businesses. I won't take time today to actually pull down into the drop-down menus, but this is a start. It's having that baseline of where we're currently investing, making sure that we're assessing the barriers that prevent the full participation of disadvantaged communities, and then having a plan to go forward in the future. I'm going to end my comments there because part of the partnership is listening. And so I'm fortunate to be here today representing our office to be able to give you a quick glimpse on our new structure. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Vince. That was an excellent overview of your office, very informative. I'll pause here and see if there are any questions from the attendees for Vince. If so, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or drop in the chat. I do have a feeling toward the end of our discussion, when we're going deeper into Justice 40, there may be some questions that we field to your office, Vince. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And thank you. I see someone has posted the link to the dashboard in the chat. Thank you so very much.
Well, next, we wanted to segue into some of the research that we've been performing over the past year or so. It has a quantitative aspect that our partners at BW Research Partnership have been helping do data collection and analysis on. And then there's also a qualitative aspect that Natasha and I have worked on in terms of recommendations for how state energy offices and minority serving institutions can work together. So we'll start with a presentation from Sarah Lehman at BW Research Partnership to talk a little bit about the quantitative data that we've uncovered over the past year. Sarah, take it away.
Thanks, Sandy. One moment, bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here, mostly to listen in and to learn, but also to have this opportunity to present a bit of the research that we've been doing here at BW in partnership with NASEO and the HBCU CDAC over the last year. Before I dive in, I'll just do a brief introduction and background on our work at BW. I'm a project manager in our West Coast office working out of San Diego, California. We are a full-service applied research firm specializing in workforce development. And we do research for various industries, local, state, and federal government agencies, but most of our focus does tend to lean towards the energy space. Since 2015, we've run the data collection and production for the annual U.S. Energy and Employment Report, which is just a national accounting of energy jobs across technologies and industries in the United States. In addition to that, we've conducted a series of annual state-level clean energy reports over the last decade with a focus on a number of issues, including workforce gap analyses, diversity, equity, and inclusion, wages and job quality, economic modeling, and workforce projections. So before I dive into the findings of this particular research effort on diversity in the energy workforce, I'll just do a brief overview of energy jobs in general based on the latest employment data from the U.S. Energy and Employment Report. So at the end of 2020, there were about 7.5 million energy workers in the U.S., which represents a 10% decline compared to the end of 2019. I do want to note that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, energy jobs had been growing steadily since 2015. And at the end of 2020, surveyed employees were quite optimistic about job growth over the coming year, projecting roughly 4 to 10% growth through the end of 2021. We're about to go back into the field to collect this year's data, so we should have an update on energy jobs data as of the end of 2021, around the first quarter of next year. So in addition to sort of accounting for total jobs in the energy sector, we've also done some research on energy job wages. And I won't go into too much detail here other than to say that overall, averaged across occupation, industry, and technology type, the energy sector pays an average wage that is about 34% higher than the national median wage of $19.14. If we compare that to other industries that were especially hard hit during the pandemic, like retail and food service, we see that energy jobs earn roughly 95 to 120% more than the median hourly wage in these industries. So that was just a brief overview of employment in the energy sector overall, but I will transition into the findings from our Energy Workforce Diversity Report that was published earlier in January. So the research for this report draws on a survey of adults across the United States. In total, we had just over 5,400 respondents to the survey, with 533 individuals that specifically work in the energy sector. In order to ensure sort of appropriate representation of populations, we set quotas by race, ethnicity, and gender for survey completes, and we also provided the options to take the survey in both English and in Spanish. In general, the topics covered include overall perceptions on equity and inclusion in the energy sector, opportunities for career advancement, navigation, and professional development support, wages and benefits, and overall career interests and satisfaction of energy workers. And then most importantly, we examined how these sentiments vary by specific populations. So overall, when looking at employment in the energy sector, it's pretty clear that there's generally a lower representation of women, Hispanic or Latinx, and Black or African American workers. We can see here in this bar graph on the left that only 8% of the workforce, 8% of the energy workforce are Black or African American compared to a 12% national average. And then we sort of see the same discrepancy across the board for Hispanic and Latinx workers, and for women in particular, which are somewhat drastically underrepresented in the energy workforce at 25% compared to almost half of the overall national workforce. If we look specifically at leadership roles in the energy sector, so this would include managers, supervisors, and company executives, we found that white workers were much more likely to report that they are in these leadership positions compared to any other racial or ethnic group. So looking at this graph on the right, if we look just at company executives alone, just over a third of white energy workers indicated that they are company executives, compared to less than 22% for other racial and ethnic groups. If we look at diversity in the energy workforce by technology, we kind of see similar trends where racial and ethnic minorities tend to be underrepresented compared to the national average. I think, again, probably the biggest highlights in this slide are that there are fewer Black or African American, Hispanic or Latinx, and women working in the energy sector just compared to the overall national workforce. So the findings on this slide, I think, are probably some of the most interesting from the study, because this is where we really dig into perceptions of belonging and inclusion from the energy workforce. In general, what we found was across all questions regarding equity and inclusion, we did find that Hispanic and Latinx energy workers tended to feel slightly more optimistic about overall diversity and inclusion in the energy sector compared to Asian and Black or African American respondents. But in general, though, we found that fewer than half of surveyed energy workers across race and ethnicity felt optimistic about their company's diversity and inclusion in recruitment and hiring policies, or just generally as far as participation in leadership roles. Along sort of a similar vein, we found that white male energy workers were more likely to report feeling accepted and valued in their workplace compared to women and other racial and ethnic groups. And then again, in general, women were just less likely to agree with nearly all statements regarding workplace belonging and acceptance compared to their male counterparts. So another element that we explored in the research was sort of just overall exposure to energy careers through job fairs and networking events. We found that in general, white energy workers were significantly more likely to indicate that they had seen an energy company at a local job fair or a networking event compared to other racial and ethnic groups. And then when examining sort of overall barriers to career advancement and navigation in the energy workplace, Black or African American respondents indicated that overcoming bias and prejudice in the workplace was the biggest challenge for them, and no other racial or ethnic group mentioned this as one of their greatest challenges. So with regards to wages and benefits, we see sort of a similar trend here, with white energy workers more likely to report both higher starting wages and overall wages compared to other racial and ethnic groups. And white energy workers were also more likely to receive full healthcare coverage and retirement benefits. So this last element here, we sort of explored just overall satisfaction in energy careers. And again, we had similar results here with white male energy workers reporting generally higher levels of career satisfaction and satisfaction with benefits and professional development support. So these slides are really just a brief overview of the main highlights and findings from the research. I will say that the report is a hefty 50 pages or so, and it really digs a bit deeper into each of these aspects of access, equity, inclusion, support, and just overall perceptions of the energy labor market across these various populations and communities. So with this background in mind, I'm going to hand the mic back over to Sandy, who will cover what I think is probably the more important stuff here, which is how can we address and how can we solve and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in the energy sector?
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a great presentation, and we're so appreciative of the work that you've done on this. I'll pause before I go into the recommendations. I did want to see if there were any clarifying questions for Sarah from the audience. so that everybody's on the same page.
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
This is Dr. John Galiotis with Harvard University. Miss or Dr. Lehman, when you did your study, the subjects were from, are you talking about the US or a particular state or global?
So we conducted the survey across the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andy, just a quick maybe context for the group in terms of the study. How did we get to this study and how does it relate to the broader US Energy report?
Sorry, Natasha, could you repeat the question? You cut out a little bit.
That it may be helpful for the group to just put in context the study itself and how it relates to the broader energy and employment report.
Sure, I'm happy to tackle that, Sarah, unless you have any thoughts there. But I do think, and we also have Phil Jordan with BW Research on the line, who's been one of the principal investigators of the US Energy and Employment Report for many years now. And I think one of the most consistent trend lines was this question of underrepresentation of various cohorts within the US Energy and Employment Report. And of course, anecdotally, hearing from minorities about the lack of access to opportunities and benefits within the energy transition. So that was really kind of the genesis and the impetus for why we thought this warranted further investigation. Sarah, Phil, feel free to weigh in because I know you've been in this data much more than I have.
I think you covered it very nicely. I know, if I don't want to put Phil on the spot, but I know he does tend to have a way with, providing a little bit more context and sort of 1,000-foot overview, but I don't know, he might not be on right now.
Yeah. There was also a question from Jada Sherman in the chat about the age range considered in the study. Sarah, would you have that off the top of your head?
Yeah. I was just typing a response. So we kept the survey to individuals 18 years of age and older, so just adult residents across the United States. We didn't look at specific cross tabulations on the data by age group, but it is data that is available and something that we can examine if there's interest in that.
Great. And then there was also a question about where this is available for upload. And so I will drop the link in the chat so that you can view the full report if you're interested. And with that, I will segue into the second piece of this, which is the recommendations that came out of the report. And the data points that Sarah presented really highlighted the inequities and disparities. But the next question really became, what can NASEO and state energy offices do about it? And after some research and direct engagement with both state energy offices and minority serving institutions, we started to build a policy case for why state energy offices should care and what they can do about workforce equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so we released this report, Energy Sector Workforce Diversity, Access, and Inclusion, and the Policy Case for Investment, that included some of the recommendations for states that are interested in this workforce between economic and workforce diversity and equity. And so the policy case came down to three key aspects. First, revenue and innovation. We found through our research that on average, companies that lack racial, ethnic, and gender representation exhibit poorer financial performance and report lower innovation revenue compared to their more diverse counterparts. So bringing that back to the policy case, investments in a more diverse and inclusive workforce and business environment can help state and local governments raise revenue, build a more competitive and higher performing economy, and support innovation in order to achieve their economic development and clean energy goals. A second aspect of this is this reality that there are major parts of our energy system and market that remain untapped and underserved. And despite the fact that we've seen overall growth in the deployment of clean energy, people and communities of color, as well as communities in rural and remote areas, tend to experience lower rates of adoption. And exacerbating matters, people of color are more likely to bear the costs of the uneven deployment of clean energy, whether in the form of higher energy and transportation cost burdens, heightened energy insecurity, or increased medical expenses resulting from exposure to harmful air pollutants. Conversely, investments in workforce development and diversity can help break some of these cycles. We found research from the Harvard Business Review that found that when at least one member of a team has traits in common with the end user, the entire team better understands that user. A team with a member who shares a client's ethnicity is 152% likelier than another team to understand that client. So what that means is that a more representative energy workforce, including the technicians installing the technologies, all the way up to the executives devising strategy and investments, can not only help businesses be more competitive and innovative, but also unlock opportunities for policies to better deliver on clean energy and climate goals. And then finally, even absent sort of the monetary and economic considerations, economic mobility and opportunity afforded to all people is critical for community and individual development. So this is a part of doing one's part to support this effort. So the next part of our research involved looking at states that are delivering on this policy case. And I won't go into everything here, but just to note a few examples. We found an example from the California Energy Commission, which is providing grants for technical training in alternative fuel vehicles and electric vehicles, and in particular, leveraging relationships with community colleges and disadvantaged and high pollution communities. The District of Columbia has been incorporating workforce training opportunities into Solar Works DC program, which promotes solar installations in lower income neighborhoods around the district. The Mississippi Energy Office has been partnering with Mississippi State University, Jackson State University, the University of Mississippi, and the University of Southern Mississippi on an inclusive innovation program, which is helping entrepreneurs in energy and agriculture related technologies get connected to technical assistance and financial networks in order to commercialize their technologies. And in New York, the State Energy Office, NYSERDA, has a suite of workforce development and training programs. And one of the specific metrics they use to incentivize the delivery of those grants and those programs, they denote priority populations such as Native Americans, individuals with disabilities, residents in environmental justice communities, previously incarcerated individuals, and others who are really sort of the target population. And another aspect of our research involved examining the value add that HBCUs bring to their communities and the economy and the innovation and STEM ecosystems. And so I'll pass it back to Natasha to elaborate a bit further on that. Natasha, the floor is yours.
Sorry, trying to get off mute. Thank you, Sandy. I think you covered quite extensively and made the case really for a more diverse workforce. I think in undertaking this research, we look at not just the ethnic and racial makeup, but I think someone in the chat raised a question about age, and we were keenly interested in looking at that as well. And when you look at HBCUs, there are 101 HBCUs across the country, doing business in around 21 states and territories, with the majority of our HBCUs in Alabama. 14 are in Alabama. And one of the things that is often not emphasized is within the 101 HBCUs, there are 11 that are specifically focused two-year institutions where a lot of certificate training and workforce programs often takes place in partnership with local organizations and community college as compared to the four-year degree granting institutions. So as the states think about, opportunities for partnerships and to take advantage of the need for new technical skills and training individuals to be prepared to take on those jobs. Looking at HBCUs and in particular our two-year institutions is really a place to build true partnerships. And when you think about the economics of HBCUs, if you can advance the slide, Sandy, that would be helpful. The 101 HBCUs operating in the 21 states and territories enroll about 300,000 students in various programs across the country. But the majority of those students, 70% of them, coming from low-income families, and 80% of that number being African-American students. While we are historically Black in nature, there are a significant number of students that are non-Black, including white students who participate and enroll in our institutions. When you look at STEM degrees, a lot of the careers in the energy sector, and in particular the clean energy sector, really require some training, if not degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math. And our institutions historically awards up to 24% of STEM degrees earned by African-American and minority students. Looking at the overall economic impact, HBCUs are definitely a player in this space, and where overall economic activity has been lagging, our institutions' economic contribution in the communities where they're located is critically important and equally impactful. We have and we generate around 14.8 billion in economic activity on an annual basis. And you parse that between the public HBCUs and the private HBCUs, you're looking at public institutions generating 9.6 billion of that activity and another 5.2 billion by the private institutions. And what we do know is that every dollar spent by an HBCU and its students produces even more economic activity. Looking at employment impacts that are directly related to this conversation, our students engage in the workforce at 134,000 plus jobs in their localities and regional economies. And of the total jobs on HBCU campuses, approximately 60,000 jobs, there is approximately 77,000 off-campus jobs that are there as well. So it would be a disservice really not to think about how to engage our institutions in benefits, not just because of the Justice 40 initiative, but HBCUs are sources of labor for jobs and sources of information for research teams and development and deployment of technology. And again, this conversation is really designed to recognize that and to think through how the state energy offices who have significant influence in their respective states to identify programs and priorities around energy tech transition can really work with HBCUs and take advantage of the intellectual talent within the within the academies to spur economic activity in the locations where they are, as well as nationally.
Great. Well, thanks, Natasha. So with all of this in mind, really looking at the state energy offices roles and the HBCUs roles, we went back to this question of what can state energy offices do? And we found a few key levers that can help drive more investments and opportunities to those who have been underrepresented. And of course, an important undercurrent that came up in our discussions and our research is that there are a lot of opportunities, as Natasha mentioned, for minority serving institutions such as HBCUs to better integrate and serve as partners to states in this energy and climate transition that we're in. So first, what we found is that state energy offices can directly support workers and businesses in developing relevant, marketable skills and knowledge. And this may come in the form of educational programming in STEM and research, internships and job placement programs, apprenticeships and training programs, both in the classroom and online. And there are a few ways for state energy offices to think about how to bring a more diverse and underserved set of folks into the fold. For instance, through partnerships with minority serving institutions, vocational and community colleges, and STEM-focused K-12 schools serving disadvantaged communities. Also through targeted workforce program outreach and prioritization of underserved populations and communities. And another piece that came up in a lot of discussions is this issue of wraparound support for groups such as caregivers that may be facing higher barriers to workforce entry. For instance, through offering flexible work hours, remote work and training options, childcare support, transit support, and other flexibilities that they might need. Another lever that's available to many state energy offices is to build demand for energy workers, technologies, knowledge, and skill sets, whether through using their power of the purse, through procurement, or in the way that they structure policies, programs, and investments. And again, sort of thinking about how to advance workforce and economic diversity in this way, we encourage states to think about promoting local and diverse hiring, whether in their energy incentive and financing programs and through community benefits agreements. One key recommendation that we make is to reduce or waive cost share or cost match requirements for diverse owned businesses and minority serving institutions that may be applying for state funds, because we've heard that can be a barrier. Incorporating minority and women owned businesses in state spending and procurement targets too is another big area where we see opportunities. And then finally, through the convening, informing, and planning work that state energy offices do. And in the job space, this may happen through workforce studies and assessments, workforce surveys and outreach, and just transition planning. And again, we'd encourage states to think about ways to bring new perspectives to these processes by engaging minority serving institutions and community-based organizations in policy and program design, conducting worker surveys to understand levels and potential barriers to diversity, access, and inclusion, and encouraging and supporting coordination among minority serving institutions interested in energy, climate, and STEM programming. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions or comments so far. And if not, we'll keep going with the program.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Has a survey been done to identify the performance of underrepresented students within the industry? So we talked about the needs, we talked about a lot of things. What about the performance? How do they perform when they're hired?
That was not within the survey that we conducted. I may ask Sarah or others that may be familiar with other workforce surveys, whether they've come across that question. research question. But otherwise, we can make note of it and keep an eye out for anything that might come across our desks.
Hey, Sandy, this is Phil. So I'm not aware of any that specifically measure performance. We sort of, obviously for our survey, we focused on promotion and sort of the experience of energy workers and how they sort of felt as though they were able to progress, obstacles and barriers and other things that were, have been part of their careers. I think it's a terrific question. The one concern I have about it is that it's very hard to ask that sort of in an unbiased way in a survey. And so we'd have to really think through how to get that included. But it's definitely something that we should think about. How would we define performance is the first question. And then how do we design a questionnaire where people will be honest and sort of, even when they're not intentionally lying, just that their sort of biases don't come through on those responses. But that's a really, really interesting question, and we'll definitely think hard about that one.
And the reason I say that is because the world is changing. Now the buzzword is talent development. So I know that from my recent experiences abroad in the energy sector. And this is where the system is gone, FYI. But performance is a key factor as well. So that's just FYI.
That's a great point. Thank you for that.
Okay.
I do see there are a couple of questions in the chat. Sumesh, you asked, what metrics can state energy offices use to measure the impacts of the levers discussed on the call? And that's absolutely a conversation I would love to have with the state energy offices. What metrics do you feel are reasonable to track? And how can we get data in a cost-effective way? So that might be a great question to try to explore in future calls. And I can certainly do a bit of research on how the states that we've seen interesting, innovative programs from are tracking their progress. Sumesh, feel free to add if you'd like to elaborate on that question at all.
Hey, Sandy, great call so far. Again, I'm Sumesh Arora. I serve as the director of the State Energy Office in Mississippi, and it's one of the challenges that we always face is, how do we really measure the impacts of the work that we do with, whether it's high school, this energy academy, or even we recently did a boot camp for a STEM program at Jackson State University, which is our flagship HBCU in Mississippi. But really trying to understand, how do you measure the long-term impacts of those interventions is a challenge, right? So always come back to this notion of outputs versus impacts. And we can track the number of students we talked to or showed up at a meeting or workforce, but longer term, how do we really know how did we really help a certain group, a certain segment of the population? And I've yet to crack that nut. So I'm open to all ideas out there, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, probably. So.
And Sandy, just to piggyback on that point, one of the things that's been mentioned earlier is, how do you handle bias in a survey that's sent out to different companies with different performance metrics and how they actually evaluate their employees. One of the things that the CEI does is partner with our career services offices on campus. And as we try to gather data around this question, engagement with them and the companies that recruit on campus could probably be instructive in terms of, how are HBCU students performing in these companies once they are hired, not just going through an internship in the summer, but when they are truly part of an organization.
I have recently offered trainings at several oil and gas industries with the university, and I ask, independently, how do the students perform going through this training? I know the ethnic, backgrounds and the race and all that. But I want to know from industry, from the perspective, how do they perform? Are they good operators? Are they dependable, reliable, on time? Are they safe? Do they perform, the various troubleshooting skills that they have acquired into ensuring the plant is moving forward in the right direction, et cetera, as technicians, as operators, as engineers, et cetera. And the overall consensus is, yes, they do. However, improve their troubleshooting skills. Oh, great. Then I go back to the curriculum and I make that adjustment and then go back to industry. What about now? I said, outstanding. Can I have 10 more like that? This is so industry gets involved. And I think we have a lot of data regarding diversity and such, but we ought to invite industry and let industry tell us about their performance. That's the other 50% of the success of such an effort. My opinion, that's all it is.
Thank you.
Sandy, I might just comment real quickly that, we've done some work with a few states talking to some of the employers, and by and large, what we found is that most employers don't have formal policies or procedures that are proactive in nature. So the industry is really made up of a lot of small companies.
Yes.
There are a lot of small construction companies. In particular, would be sort of the most typical profile of a clean energy company in the US. While almost all of them have noted in these states that we've worked that they have some sort of reactive policy to respond to, say, incidents of discrimination in the workplace, having proactive policies in place or formal or informal policies in place around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion is pretty rare. And so I think that one of the sort of challenges that we, and some of the perceptions that we hear from employers is that when you put out a statement that is sort of general in nature, like having a workplace that is welcoming, inclusive, where all employees can thrive, it's like 95% strongly agree with that statement. And then as you get a bit more prescriptive around some of the programs and policies that might expand access to underrepresented folks, the enthusiasm dips pretty significantly. And that depends a little bit on geography, but not much, and a little bit on sort of the technology area or the industry sector, but not much. And so it's a big challenge in just sort of getting past the first threshold question with employers of even sort of recognizing that this topic should be on their radar. It's very different from thinking about big tech companies, right? Where sort of all they're thinking about these days and still not doing a very good job. When we then start thinking about pretty small, in most cases by the federal government standards, they'd be considered micro businesses. To the specific question about the metrics, one suggestion that I would have, and it's not very prescriptive, but Sumesh, just one sort of thought is, what we like to try to think about in terms of measuring is in the very short term, how have we changed perceptions? And so those would be perceptions of companies, perceptions of individuals, right? So attitudes and perceptions. Then are we impacting behaviors? Meaning have behaviors actually changed? So are we seeing more companies adopting certain policies or programs or attending trainings or doing other things? Are we seeing more students or recent graduates engaging in different networking events or other types of programming that could be useful for them? And then looking at sort of the long-term employment outcomes that do take longer, right? So especially if we're talking about universities that are 4-year programs, and then we're talking about the experiences afterwards and moving up in a career. So I guess my initial advice would be to say, think about attitudes first, behavior second, and then some of the more concrete employment outcomes third, just because you want to see if you're having an impact before you'll be able to measure. You want to know if you're on the right track before you can actually really measure the impact, because it takes a while.
Thanks, Phil. We have a hand raised from Dr. Jayhani. Feel free to weigh in.
Hi, this is Mansura Jayhani. I am the director of the Urban Mobility and Equity Center at Morgan State University. So we are a university transportation center. funded by US DOT. I was wondering if Department of Energy has a plan to have those centers like energy research centers, and especially at HBCUs.
That's a great question. And Natasha, I think that is one of the pieces that you'll be covering when you're discussing the infrastructure bill. Is that right?
That's correct. Within the bill, there are a number of funding for different programs within different federal agencies. So we'll touch on that later.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, that might actually be a great segue into the next part of our conversation, which is focused on the infrastructure bill. The thought here being that with state energy offices and other partners in the energy space set to receive federal funding, we'd really like to think about how to position HBCUs and state energy offices to work together and think about how to deliver some of this funding and its benefits to the communities and the people that HBCUs serve. So I will once again share my screen just to provide a little bit of context. So the IIJA was signed into law by President Biden on November 15th, 2021. It includes funding for energy and transportation infrastructure programs and projects. This has not yet been passed, but we may see additional funding and a suite of tax incentives potentially available through a separate reconciliation package, which is being worked through the Congress. Just to note, many of the provisions that we'll be highlighting are spread over 5 years from fiscal year 22 through 2026. We are still a little bit unclear on the availability and the timing of the funding, especially for some of these competitive programs that are noted. And NASEO has a resource hub up on our website that includes some of these key provisions that we're tracking for the state energy offices. So I'd encourage you to check out that website. Just a really quick review of some of the items that we're tracking for the state energy offices by priority. The top one is the U.S. State Energy Program. This is a formula-funded program to state and territory energy offices that is extremely flexible and driven by governor's priorities and planning. So the state energy offices oversee these funds, and it provides sort of a pretty small but flexible source of funding to work with different partners in the energy space to advance energy priorities. The IIJA is also providing funding, increased funding for the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is for low-income energy efficiency for homes, $500 million for the low-income home energy assistance program through the LIHEAP agencies for energy bill assistance, money through the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which will go to state energy offices as well as cities and localities, and a new energy efficiency revolving loan fund capitalization grant program that will provide capital for loans for energy efficiency in the residential and commercial sectors. $40 million through the Energy Auditors Training Grant Program that directly supports energy audits. $225 million for building energy codes and technical assistance training. $5 billion for preventing outages and enhancing resilience of the grid, and up to 50% of that will go to the states via a formula that's to be determined by the Energy Secretary. Several billion too is going towards electric grid reliability and resilience research, development, and demonstration. That's very oriented towards electric utilities. $500 million in grants for energy efficiency and renewable energy in public school facilities, which will be going through local education agencies. We also have $2.5 billion in grants for charging and fueling infrastructure through the Department of Transportation with priority to rural, low and moderate income, and multi-unit dwellings. There's a National Electric Vehicle Formula Program. The funding will go through the state departments of transportation with a focus on alternative fuel vehicle charging and fueling. Over $6 billion for battery processing and manufacturing. $200 million for electric vehicle battery recycling. $750 for advanced energy manufacturing and recycling. $5 billion for the Clean School Bus Program for elementary and secondary schools, and then $400 million for critical minerals mining and recycling research. And then that's kind of a select few that we're tracking for the state energy offices, but CDAC has also been tracking a number of these provisions for opportunities for HBCUs. So Natasha, feel free to highlight some of those as well.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. I think, you take a look at the bill and it's massive. There are abundance of funding opportunity and programs for organizations like our institutions to really dig into and take advantage of that for the campus, as well as to advance research that our professors and faculty members are already engaged in. But as we looked at the bill at the CEI, there were about 5 areas where we saw really great opportunity. Obviously, workforce development is one. There's an abundance of funding for training individuals, be that at the community college level, certification, or the degree granting level. Within the Department of Energy, I think Sandy highlighted a number of programs. Many of them, or a few of them, are directly attached to the state energy offices who will be involved in the allocation of those funds. Broadband is one area where we see potential opportunity to develop teams to really fill gaps within minority communities. To ensure that as the country transitioned to this new economy, especially in light of limitations presented as a result of the pandemic, how can we really position our communities to really function in a way that reflects where the country is moving? And then environmental justice. Back in May, during our initial convening, leadership from the Department of Energy highlighted and told a really impactful story of environmental impacts on communities, on individuals, and how through this work we can tackle some of those issues from not just an environmental perspective, but an equity perspective. And of course, there's always the economic impact of those projects and programs. And of course, I think one area that is really exciting is the focus on electric vehicles and developing the right infrastructure to ensure that there's fueling and charging stations to meet this need as there is more emphasis placed on more electric vehicles in the economy. So one of the things that the CEI and CDAC is really focused on is how do we, as a national intermediary for HBCUs, support the academy? And through our partnership with NASEO, working with VW, we talked about the diversity workforce research report and recommendation. We were also instrumental in putting a team together to explore funding by a major philanthropic organization that connects one of our HBCUs, John C. Smith, with a Hispanic Serving Institution, Florida International University, and The Ohio State University to really explore how minority researchers experience this space and how funding can reach in a more impactful way researchers to impact communities of color particularly those where our institutions are located. So those are some of the things that we do by putting these teams together to position them to be successful in their pursuit of funding to support research and ultimately drive economic opportunity. And this conversation is intended to really explore and better understand and engage the HBCU faculty around what is important to you, what benefits can organizations like NASEO and the CEI and CDAC do to support your work and to position your proposal to be successful so that you can have the resources that's needed to advance projects and research for the betterment of the institutions and the local and national economy. In terms of the actual proposals or provisions of the infrastructure bill, as I mentioned, the weatherization program is one where through our work with the state energy offices, we hope that there would be opportunities to really take advantage of those funds, working with the community-based organization and nonprofit organizations that CDAC already engages with in the place-based localities where we have active projects. I believe Dr. Jahani talked about or questioned, opportunities for centers of excellence on campus within the bill. There's funding for additional university transportation programs and pulling together consortia, not just with HBCU as a member, but HBCUs as the lead of consortia tackling research that is important to the institution. Within the existing consortia, there are 3 that are led by HBCUs, Dr. Jahani at Morgan State and others at North Carolina A&T. And the CEI is interested in engaging with other HBCUs who may be interested in pursuing their own consortia with other organizations. Within the bill, there is significant funding for broadband. And we know that within our community, there is opportunities and gaps that needs to be filled when you think about, how we connect our senior citizens to the internet. How do we address digital equity, given all the disadvantages within our communities from individuals, just geographic location that may have difficulty connecting, or even just having resources to get the proper equipment to be able to engage in this new digital economy. So those are some of the things that the CEI, after this convening, we've already started our outreach to different institutions and members of the academy around their research and how through our efforts with NASEO and other organizations, we can support in any way the things that you're doing, and more importantly, to position our institutions to take advantage of the resources that's available through the infrastructure bill, as well as using those resources to tackle the issues presented and that the Biden administration is trying to address as part of this Justice 40 initiative.
Thanks, Natasha. Did you want to touch on this environmental justice program credit? It seems pretty relevant.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. I missed that. I appreciate you highlighting that. One of the things I think going back to our initial engagement in May was highlighted, and I think we all are very familiar with the effects of environmental stressors in low-income communities when we engage in place-based activities in New Orleans and looking at some of the challenges communities face in terms of industrial legacy that impacts our communities and the individuals. What is interesting and highlighted in the bill is funding to institutions of higher education for environmental justice program, up to base credit for 20% of program costs. And of course, MSIs and HBCUs are eligible for up to 30% of program costs to support environmental justice programs on campus. We do know that there are some. I had a conversation yesterday with faculty who are interested in not only their existing programs, but also how to enhance what they do have, given what is presented and present in their local communities, and to be able to take advantage of these funds that obviously they're included because there is a need, but to be able to do research that addresses issues in our communities that we see every day is great. And it's good that our organizations are already thinking about how they too can position themselves to be part of this transition and the environmental justice issues that affects the individuals where we are located.
Great, thank you so much, Natasha. We do have another quick poll question just to gauge everybody's levels of interest in different aspects of the infrastructure bill. So you'll see it's kind of a multi-choice question. If you could choose your top three, what on this list interests you the most? And of course, if there's something on this list that that is missing, feel free to put it in the chat. We'd really like to figure out a way to prioritize and scope how future discussions are carved out. All right, it looks like we've got a few more folks typing in. Give it another 10 seconds. All right, great. Well, I will share the results of the poll. It looks like energy efficiency in buildings, electric grid modernization and resilience, alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure seem to be rising to the top, but we'll definitely dig into this a little bit more and see how we can deliver the best information for you all. Great. Okay, well, our last conversation for the day is going to be facilitated by Dr. Ford, who has been a great partner through CDAC and in Florida, representing a Hispanic serving institution. So it's focused on Justice 40, and really the idea here is to try to get a sense of this question around metrics and how HBCUs can help support the federal government and states in this vision. So Dr. Ford, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. And hello, everyone. So a couple of things, I don't know if I can, I'll do a quick screen share. It won't be death by PowerPoint here, but what I wanted to do is, obviously Justice 40 is all about, as Mr. Kors mentioned, highlighted earlier, it's about making sure that 40% of the investment to mitigate climate change and climate transitions that benefits underserved communities. And one of the things that I want to broach to stimulate conversation, and then I'm actually give a tangible example what I'm working on at Florida International University is how do we turn HBCUs and minority serving institutions, which are typically located and co-located in minority dominated communities and have major infrastructure challenges and things that need to be updated and upgraded. So I want to stimulate the thought for both our MSI, HBCU participants, as well as say energy office officials and industry who may be here, is to consider let HBCUs, MSIs be considered as hubs for Justice 40. What I mean by that, let us figure out a way to build innovation ecosystem hubs around HBCUs. And what that can look like, as my colleague at Morgan State mentioned, you can build these centers of excellence that will allow HBCUs to be R&D partners, workforce development centers, and entrepreneurial catalysts. Some of the challenges with metrics, as we touched on a few minutes ago, is both at a micro and macroscopic level. To speak to macroscopic issues, I'm working on right now an NSF-funded project that's looking at a more equitable energy transition and how do you measure it. I'll probably reach out to our colleagues and share some of our initial findings. It's actually a non-trivial exercise to figure out at a macroscopic level, how do we measure and know that we have a more equitable energy transition? What we do know at a macroscopic level is historically MSIs, HBCUs aren't getting the fair share of the pie relative to R&D investments. If you look at how technology diffuses from the federal government by measure of intellectual property, by measure of SBIR awards, minority communities, minority businesses aren't getting their fair share. And so there's a lot of things that can be done with Justice 40, and HBCUs and MSIs can be hubs. So what I would like to propose is just some ideas that we have done here at Florida National University as a model that we are open to partner. We have partnered with other MSIs in the past, and we obviously want to be a partner with federal and state agencies as we attack this issue. One example that we have done that is a long, 20+ year project that we've done in partnership with the U.S. Department of Energy is a DOE's Fellows Program. It's actually an R&D-based research and development workforce program. And we have worked with a program office at the U.S. Department of Energy for 20+ years. And we have delivered hundreds of students over a number of years that have been right in the energy sector, right in STEM. And they've done internships, they've done research, they've gotten PhDs and graduate degrees and gone on and work in industry. And we've touched a number of different STEM professions. Most recently, we just wrapped up a project with the Department of Energy that I think is also can be reconfigured for Justice 40 called Mission to Market, where we trained up the STEM entrepreneurial workforce, which is also a challenge that we see. We don't have enough minority-owned businesses. To Phil's earlier point, a lot of clean tech companies are small, and we don't have enough minority-led, minority-owned businesses that are participating in the space, which I think also is an unmeasured issue that we have. We don't have a data point right now, to my knowledge, of how many minority-owned clean energy companies that currently exist. And so here's a model that we've worked on, that we even got some recent funding to continue, that we've actually incubated students, businesses in clean energy and energy sector related to entrepreneurial fellows training. So given our shortness of time, what I wanted to do was present a new institute we've stood up that we hope to capture the momentum around what's happening with Justice 40, what's happening with the infrastructure bill. We have, at FIU, we have stood up internally a preeminent institute that's going to focus on resiliency, sustainability related to infrastructure. We call it Interact for short, but we have put together, roughly speaking, 9 centers, research centers on our campus to focus on transportation, communications, waste, water, and the electrical systems. And so we have proactively gotten ahead of this, a little over a year-old program, close to 2 years old, and we are open for partnerships. And this is what I encourage campuses, HBCUs, is to internally assess your own resources, your research programs, and start organizing now and start partnering. And so we've organized into these particular research areas. And the objective is self-organize and then find partners. So we have a bridge program that's part of a transportation research center. We have an energy grid and smart grid center, a structural health monitoring programs. All of these types of programs on our campus can help our local community statewide and working with municipalities to address a lot of upgrades that are going to be happening to infrastructure, from bridges to facilities to energy. And so I share this as a quick example to stimulate a discussion of what can we do as MSI, HBCU leaders to self-organize and then figure out ways that we can start partnering in our underserved community. So what I'm going to pause here, I know we're short on time to start simulated discussions here, but some strategies we are to consider. How do we partner as universities with our state energy offices, our federal government partners, and industry? A lot of this money has been hinted to by Natasha and Sandy will go to state offices and some federal agencies. How do we properly partner? How do we also prepare our local business communities through SBIR, SCTR programs, as well as entrepreneurial support centers that we may have? Some of you may have SBDCs on your campus. How to use some of those assets to help with some of the small business spend goals that is actually baked into the infrastructure bill? And as already mentioned, what workforce development programs do you have on campus, or can you rebuild or repurpose to fit into some of these goals? So I actually want to stop here and hear from the community. What ideas, what are you thinking? And then what are the state energy offices thinking to be able to start addressing these various issues?
Thanks, Chris. And I'm sorry that we are running out of time. If anybody does have any quick thoughts, please do feel free to weigh in over the chat or speak up. This is also something that we can try to address again in a future meeting. We have our next one on January 11th, where we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about ways that state energy offices can partner with HBCUs. The list that Chris offered is a really great starting point. So I'll leave it at that. Open the floor for any last minute thoughts or comments.
I think this is a well-organized effort. And Chris, Dr. Ford should be commended. And I think that is going to be very useful. It has been tested in the past in Houston, in the energy capital. And this is an avenue many companies, many global giants in the energy field are going, moving forward. So be glad to share more on that.
Great. Thank you, Professor.
You're
I did
welcome.
see a question from Eddie Trevino in Texas about whether, Chris, your programs have any plans to partner with underutilized businesses?
Yes, all the above, all small businesses. If you look at the infrastructure bill, there's a mandate for 10% spend with small business, and each state is actually called to come up with a small business spend strategy. And so, yes, we have a program I didn't get a chance to highlight. We have an incubator program that we work with small businesses in South Florida, and actually across Florida. We have a new partnership with the University of Florida, where we're actually working with all small businesses in Florida, and we can work with external outside of Florida as well. But yes, we do have an intent to partner with any and all small businesses.
Can you share an example of a success story between your program and a small business? Just one example.
I'll give you one quick one. We just partnered with a small minority business, just won an SBR award with Air Force, Air Force Works, AFWorks, and to address a lot of tech issues in the military related to healthcare outcomes and some energy related items. So that's one quick example. I had a couple others in terms of we've helped small businesses win grants and contracts through our incubator program, but we have multi-million hours of impact with our incubator program the last couple of years.
Okay.
In our final minute, oh, sorry.
I wanted to add another thing we've done that's also maybe not as a tangible success story. We've helped probably close to 200 students partner with energy technologies over the last few years, which is important to the pipeline that eventually lead to small business. Very important note that we don't have enough pipeline in terms of tech entrepreneurs in energy space.
Thanks, Chris. In our final minute, I did want to extend some key thank yous to CEI. Natasha, thank you for being such a great co-host and partner. To Vince and DOE's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. They funded a lot of the research that we presented today, both the quantitative and the analytical stuff, as well as the conversations that we've been able to have over the past year with HBCUs and state energy offices. Sarah and Phil, thank you so much for BW's expertise and data collection efforts on this. And Chris, thank you so much for the breakdown of J40 and getting that conversation started. In our last minute, I am about to launch one final poll that I hope you'll stay and complete, but it's essentially, what do you want to hear about next? Our plan for the January 11th convening is to start to dig deeper into how state energy offices and minority serving institutions can work together, as well as community colleges and technical colleges in the energy and innovation space. But we have a lot of time, and we can sculpt the program around what you're most interested in. So please feel free to weigh in. Also feel free to email me or Natasha with your comments and feedback as well. And thank you to all of you who participated via chat and conversation. It's been a really great hour and a half. And I'll just let the poll keep running, and anybody who wants to stay and see the results, you're more than welcome to, but I know that we are past time. So I will thank you all and wish you all a wonderful day. All right, I will share the results for anybody who's interested. It looks like we do have some interest in how state energy offices and MSIs can work together. More research into disparities and inequities. The reconciliation package and some opportunities there too. So we'll plan to cover that as well. Great. Natasha, Chris, any last comments? I know we've got the spare crew now.
Looking forward to January discussion.
And thank you, Sandy, for your partnership and your leadership and really working with the CEI and ensuring that we're really thinking about the best way to amplify the work that we do. And a great way to do that is to identify resources to support different projects and programs. So appreciate you.
Great. Likewise, thank you, everybody. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and end the meeting, and thank you all. Have a wonderful day. And again, we're available via email with any questions or comments. Take care.
Thank you.